Also, a friend of mine is a Catholic. He's unhappy in his marriage, but as you know, he can't get a divorce in the church.
Yes, I know.
That sounds medieval and cruel to me. A person should be able to get a divorce any time they want to.
Well, legally your friend can get a divorce if he wants to. But the church will not condone it.
Who are they to define marriage anyways? Why should a bunch of priests who never get married be able to tell people they can't get a divorce? I know you're a Christian and all that, but you're not going to defend the Catholic Church, are you?
Well, I do not agree with every teaching of the Catholic Church, but overall I feel much more warmth towards it than hostility. The various mainstream Christian churches do have much in common with one another.
What do you think of their not granting divorces?
Well, Catholic rules around marriage and divorce are strict, but somewhat arcane. I do agree with the general principle, which can be traced right back to the teachings of Jesus, that divorce is wrong.
But you see, that teaching makes him feel stuck in the marriage. If it weren't for the church putting a guilt trip on him, he probably would have left her already, and he'd be free.
A church can force a person to feel guilty, it can only preach. If the person feels guilty about something, maybe he has good reason to do so.
What business of yours is it whether someone sticks with their marriage or not?
I suppose it's none of my business. But part of being a Christian is sharing the gospel. What a man does from there is between him and God.
Why does your gospel have to be so negative?
Actually, the word gospel means good news. But the message as a whole is sort of a bad news good news thing.
What do you mean?
As in first, here's the bad news. As much as we try to ignore it, each of us is sinning against God and against one another, regularly. These sins have consequences, because God is just. But the good news is that forgiveness is available, because God is merciful. The life and death of Jesus demonstrated that mercy, and reconciled God and mankind. For the individual to come into the fullness of that new life, he has to repent first, to acknowledge his sin and reject it. So part of the gospel is calling attention to sin, by waking up the conscience.
Okay, but why would Jesus preach against divorce? Does he want people to be miserable?
No, actually he wants us to have life more abundantly. He said so as recorded in John 10:10.
How does closing off options for us make our lives more abundant?
If a particular option is bad for us, it might be good to close it off. Suppose someone removed all of the candy from my house right now, so that it just wasn't an option if I wanted a snack. Would my life be better or worse?
That might be reasonable for children, but can't adults be trusted to make good decisions? Okay, I retract that last question. But can't you think of some circumstances where divorce might be the best outcome?
Yes, I can think of such cases. But in many of these cases my opinion might be wrong. If God had said there were no such cases, or very few exceptions, then I should trust his judgment.
But how can you be sure God says something?
Actually, I'm never 100% sure. As we've discussed in other videos, I do not think that our Bibles are free from error. However, I do believe the words of Jesus recorded in the Gospels are the most reliable of the biblical teachings, especially in cases where a teaching is repeated in different texts.
And in this case, what do the Gospels say?
In the Gospels of Mark and Luke, Jesus is recorded as basically saying that it is wrong to divorce for any reason, and that if someone does divorce they should not remarry. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus makes an exception for infidelity.
Do the letters of St. Paul say anything about divorce?
Paul affirms Jesus' teaching against divorce, and does not report Matthew's exception, but adds that in the case where a non-believer abandons a believing spouse, the believer should be free to remarry.
So wait, are there exceptions or not?
Well, the text is unclear. Jesus spoke Aramaic, the Gospels were written in Greek, and we use English translations. This phrase, for any reason, could mean that there are no exceptions, or it could mean that Jesus is really objecting to divorcing someone without any legitimate reason, especially cases where one spouse abandons another spouse who has been faithful, leaving him or her to face the world alone.
So how do you decide what to make of it?
My own approach is not to try to parse words, but rather to grow in knowledge of God as a person, revealed both in Jesus as described in the Gospels, and also in conscience, which is what the New Testament calls the law written in our heart. When I consider the total picture of Jesus found in the Gospels and interpreted by the heart, I tend to think that there are a few exceptions, but that in most cases couples should reconcile, not divorce. I think that the teaching against remarriage is there to give additional opportunity for reconciliation even if a divorce happens.
Why would God insist on that? What if two people simply don't like each other anymore?
I think God calls all of us to reconcile with all of our neighbors, even the ones we don't happen to like at the moment. Perhaps the process of fixing a troubled marriage is extremely helpful in a person's growth towards that goal.
In an ideal world, maybe. But in real life people aren't that perfect.
God knows that. But He calls us to become perfect nonetheless. I suspect that's the eventual destiny of each and every one of us.
But no one can live up to that standard.
Divorce is certainly not the only area where Jesus sets the bar very high on our morality. In how we handle money, how we treat even our enemies, etc., Jesus makes what may seem like impossible demands on us. Yet He also says that all things are possible for God. And He promises that as we stumble and get up again, God will be with us always, showing the mercy and patience of a loving Father.
This teaching is difficult. You must realize that. Why should you judge someone else who faces a difficult situation and ends up choosing divorce?
I don't judge anyone else. First of all, I never have all the facts about another person's situation. I cannot see into anyone else's heart and understand their feelings and motives. Second, I was divorced once myself. I know how painful the process can be, and I am not proud of the result. Third, Jesus explicitly forbids Christians from judging others. The moral teachings of the gospel are meant first and foremost for us to shine a light into our own hearts,